Hello guys, this is part 5 of the Workstation build. In this video, we will be unboxing and installing the heatsink. For the heatsink, I went with the Noctua NH-D15, which is the best air cooler heatsink money can buy. This will be able to passively cool the Intel Xeon E5 1650 V3 CPU that I will be putting in the Workstation. This is a very high TDP CPU, coming in around 140 watt TDP, so you're going to need to have a beefy cooler for it, and the Noctua NH-D15 handles it with ease. So I'm going to go ahead and unbox the heatsink. What you'll notice with Noctua heatsinks, especially their flagship NH-D15, is it comes in a really big box, and the presentation of this box is excellent. So you get a nice foam pad at the top, and then you have a nice little box inside that contains all your mounting brackets and accessories. It's very cleanly laid out. As you can see, you also have the heatsink in its own box and the additional fan in its own box as well. So as you see, there's the additional fan. We won't be using that. And then there's the heatsink, and there's nothing left in the box. So let's go ahead and take a look at this heatsink. You're going to notice this is a really big boy. So there's the heatsink. I'm going to be removing the cardboard insert. You want to make sure you remove that before you install it. It's a bit stiff because, you also have the fan in the middle. It just slides right out. So there's a close-up look at the heatsink. There is the thermal compound I'll be using. The Arctic MX4 has an 8-year durability. There you go. There's the heatsink and what it looks like. It's a really big beast. This thing's probably the size of somebody's head. So we're going to look at the instructions on how to mount the heatsink bracket for a specific socket, which is an LGA 2011 V3. So I'm just looking at what parts are required for the socket and pulling them out of the accessory box. So I'm pulling out the right brackets there. This can be the tricky part, is identifying what specific brackets and screws and stuff go for your particular CPU socket. Some motherboards will have a built-in backplane, some won't, so you'll also have to provide the backplate depending on the socket and motherboard. My Workstation board has a built-in backplane, which is really nice, so I don't have to use Noctua's. You got to pay close attention to the screws, the threads, and the heads and everything. Match it up with what you see on the picture. And also a good way of identifying screws is quantity counts. Most different screws will have different quantities, so you could just count which bag has the right amount of screws for your socket, and that's a good way to identify via quantity counts. So I'm trying to identify what screws and washers and spacers and stuff I'll need. The pretty tedious part, I really don't like it. Gotta be careful too, because some of these will roll away from you and end up on the floor. So there's a look at the socket. This is where we're going to be installing the heatsink. First thing I'm going to install is the right, try to identify the right screw spacers that will go into the backplane socket there. As you could see there are threads. That's the built-in backplane of the MSI X99A workstation board. So I didn't have to install a backplane or anything, which is really nice. So I didn't have to take off the back panel or anything. I can basically lay the system down and install the heatsink. You want to make sure you get these screws in the right direction, because they'll be threaded on both sides. One side is for the socket, one side is for the actual heatsink bracket. So I'm going to make sure they're all nicely tight and snug. It's very important that these screws are on there pretty well, because this is going to be holding the entire heavy heatsink onto the motherboard, so you don't want them to be loose or anything. So now it's very important you look at the instructions, because you want to install the brackets in the right orientation. Some of them will go up and down, some of them will go side to side, so it's very important you look at the instructions for the heatsink for this particular socket in question, so that you are lining these up in the correct polarity. Also, there's 3 different screw holes for the bracket. You want to make sure you put it in the right one for your socket, or the spacing will be off. So once I've identified the correct polarity for the socket, we'll now secure the brackets. Now, Noctua includes I'm going to put in air quotes, a screwdriver, but it's actually the shittiest screwdriver known to man. I had a lot of trouble putting on this heatsink because it requires a lot of force, downward force, because it has the spring levers on both sides of the screws, which is pushing upwards at you. And if you use the included screwdriver, you're going to struggle for hours. Do not use the piece of crap screwdriver that Noctua gives you. It is garbage. It's basically just a wire. It's not really a screwdriver. It's nothing like Skype gives you. Skype gives you a real screwdriver. I actually ended up using the Skype screwdriver to install the heatsink because the included screwdriver was just garbage. So the next thing we're going to do is, since we have the socket ready, I'm going to prepare the CPU for thermal compound. I always take a Q-tip with a dab of isopropyl alcohol on it. Even though the CPU hasn't had thermal compound on it before, it's clean. I always like to clean the surface again. You don't have to worry about wiping up the alcohol because it will evaporate. I recommend 99%, but 97% works just as well. It just takes longer to evaporate. But I like to go over the CPU so we have a really clean surface to apply our thermal compound. It's just good practice. Now, if you have excess alcohol on there, it's taking a little bit longer to evaporate, I'll take a dry Q-tip and just rub over the surface again. But I basically want the surface of the IHS, the integrated heat spreader, on the CPU to be flawless. So now that the bracket's installed and the heatsink has been cleaned up, we're going to apply thermal compound. As I mentioned previously, the thermal compound I'll be using is Arctic MX4. Now I hover a napkin so I can lift the thermal compound tube right over it, because a lot of these thermal compound tubes, they like to drip. And obviously you don't want to drip thermal compound onto the motherboard. Most thermal compound's not conductive, but it's just going the extra mile to prevent any drippage. So we'll now place the heatsink in the right position. The brackets are only going to go on a particular way to match up with the binding post. Once you match it up, you will screw it down, and do not use the included Noctua screwdriver. It is garbage, and that's what made me struggle a lot. This heatsink is very tricky for newcomers to install. If you're brand new to this heatsink in particular, it's very hard to install because it requires a lot of pressure. The binding screws have springs under them, so they give you a lot of upward pressure. So you have to basically, you're pushing against those springs, and it's a lot of tension, and those springs are stiff. So what you need is a real good screwdriver, a long one. I recommend using the one that comes with Skype heatsinks, and that's the one I actually ended up using. And I was able to get the heatsink on. Another trick is the side that you're currently screwing on, the other side, you want to apply a little bit of downward pressure to relieve some of that tension off the screw that you're currently working on from that spring, because it's a lot of pressure. You'll notice you'll be able to get one side in, but you won't be able to get the other side in because all that upward pressure. So really, if you get one side in, you just want to get it in maybe 3/4 of a turn, if that, and then you get the other side in. You don't really want to screw the one side in a little bit too much, because you're going to have way too much pressure on that other side that you're going to have to relieve. This heatsink is very hard to install. Nobody will tell you that, though. No YouTubers, they just say, oh, it just screws on. No, there's a lot of pressure. I've installed 3 or 4 of these now, so I know how these install. You could see in the video I was using the included Noctua screwdriver, and it's a piece of garbage. You can see it's just a long shaft with that's bent in half. That's supposed to act as the handle. It's garbage. It doesn't provide you the proper torque and pressure that you're going to need. So I was really fighting with it. I was getting one side was going on, and then the next side was fighting me because of all that pressure. So unfortunately, I got too frustrated with it. I got fed up, and I stopped recording. So you won't see me finalizing the heatsink, but I did eventually get it on by using a different screwdriver. I didn't know the problem was the tool I was using. And it's the included tool for the product. You think it would be proper, right? It's not. It's garbage. So I do eventually get the heatsink on after switching to a real screwdriver and knowing about how to balance out the pressure. But it can be tricky when you first get a NH-D15. But like I said, I've installed probably about 4 or 5 of these now, so I know how to do it. I know what to expect. I know what tool to use and how to alleviate the pressures. It's a good cooler. It's a beast of a cooler. But yeah, I was getting very frustrated, and I eventually just cut the camera because you don't do too well when you have a camera pointed at you, right? And you're just chewing up your time, right? So I eventually just turned the camera off, and I think, let me try a different screwdriver. And I was able to get it on. So guys, I think I'm going to get frustrated here, and I'm going to end the video here. But I did get the heatsink on, and I told you how I did it.